The first thing I register isn't the light, but the heat. It is a heavy, suffocating blanket of desert air trapped inside canvas, mixed with a scent that has no business being here, expensive sandalwood soap and dry earth. Then comes the weight. There is an arm thrown across my waist, heavy and undeniable, pinning me to the narrow field cot. I blink the sleep away, and the panic hits me like a physical blow. The woman breathing softly against my neck isn't just anyone. It is Professor Anna Cooper, my thesis advisor, the most feared archaeologist in the hemisphere. And if the site foreman or any of the grad students walk in right now, my career is incinerated before it even begins. She shifts in her sleep, her arm tightening possessively, and I realize with a jolt of adrenaline that I am completely, utterly trapped in the evidence of my own transgression. I freeze, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs that I'm sure she can feel through the thin fabric of our shirts. In the unforgiving clarity of daylight, the physical reality of this entanglement is staggering. Anna Cooper is known for a posture so rigid it could calibrate a level, for a voice that strips the confidence off grad students like paint thinner, and for a personal bubble that is essentially a force field. But here, in the gray morning light, filtering through the tent flaps, she is unraveled. Her linen shirt is twisted, the top buttons undone, revealing the hollow of her throat where a pulse beats a slow, steady rhythm. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe architectural bun that withstands gale force winds, is loose, spilling over my shoulder in a dark, chaotic wave. It is terrifyingly intimate. The tent is already stifling. The sun has only been up for an hour, but the desert doesn't believe in mercy. I can feel the temperature rising, the air growing thick and stagnant, smelling of old canvas and the lingering ozone of last night's storm. Dust motes dance in the single sliver of light cutting across the floor, swirling in the silence. And it is silent. That is the worst part. The usual camp noise, the clatter of shovels, the drone of the generator, the shouting of the dig team is absent. It must be Sunday, or maybe it is just early enough that the world is holding its breath before the chaos starts. I stare at the ceiling of the tent, trying to calculate the geometry of an escape. My leg is hooked with hers, a tangle of denim and linen that feels less like an accident and more like a knot I have no idea how to untie. I remember the lectures she gave us in the auditorium back in Boston, her silhouette sharp against the projector screen, warning us about the dangers of contaminating a site. "Leave no trace," she had said, her eyes scanning the room with icy precision. "Your presence is a disruption." Well, my presence is currently the biggest disruption in the history of archaeology. I try to slide my hip to the right, just a millimeter. The canvas cot groans. It is a sound that seems to echo like a gunshot in the quiet tent. Anna stirs. The sound she makes is low, a soft murmur of protest that has absolutely no business coming from the throat of a woman who writes scathing peer reviews for fun. Her grip on my waist doesn't loosen, it tightens. Her hand splays flat against my stomach, her thumb brushing the fabric of my shirt in a way that sends a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. It is a reflex, unconscious and searingly hot. For a second, I stop breathing. I stop thinking. I just let myself feel the impossible weight of her, the terrifying comfort of her skin against mine. It is a dangerous indulgence. I look at her face, the tension lines around her mouth smoothed out by sleep, the guard completely dropped. This is the woman I was supposed to be learning from, not sleeping with. The woman whose approval I craved more than funding. And now I have crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. I make one more attempt, lifting her arm gently. It is heavy, dead weight. I manage to create a few inches of space, the cool air hitting my damp skin. I am almost free. I am almost out of the blast radius. Then, her breathing changes. The slow, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest hitches. She goes still. Not the stillness of sleep, but the stillness of a predator sensing movement. Her eyes open? There is no groggy transition, no blink of confusion. 1 second she is asleep, and the next she is awake. Her irises are dark, dilated, and for a fraction of a heartbeat they are soft. She looks at me with a raw, unguarded recognition that makes my stomach flip. But then the memory catches up to the biology. I watch the walls slam back up. I watch the cold, clinical distance return, sealing the breach instantly. She recoils, pulling her arm back as if she has been burned, scrambling backward until she hits the metal frame of the cot. "You," she breathes, the word raspy but sharp. "Professor," I whisper, the title hanging between us like a bad joke. She looks down at herself, at the wrinkled clothes, then back at me. The silence that stretches between us now isn't peaceful, it is brittle. It is loaded with 3 weeks of tension, professional jealousy, and the undeniable fact that we just broke every rule in the handbook. This, she says, her voice gaining that familiar, terrifying edge, is a complication. It is a disaster, I correct her. She runs a hand through her hair, wincing as she hits a tangle. She looks at the tent flap, then at me, her gaze hardening. But before she can eviscerate me, before she can fire me or exile me to the archives, my mind gets pulled back. Back away from this suffocating morning heat to the moment I stepped off the Jeep. Back to when I was just a student, and she was just a legend, and the only heat between us was the sun. 3 weeks ago feels like a different lifetime, lived by a different person who still believed that professional boundaries were made of reinforced concrete rather than fragile glass. The memory hits me with the same visceral impact as the heat did the moment I stepped out of the transport Jeep. We were 4 hours south of the nearest paved road, deep in a basin where the earth was cracked and thirsty, stripped of anything soft. The air didn't just sit there, it vibrated, shimmering off the horizon in waves that made the distant mountains look like they were melting. I remember dragging my duffel bag out of the truck bed, the red dust immediately coating my throat, and thinking that this place was designed to strip you down to your essential parts. And then I saw her. Professor Cooper wasn't just at the site, she was presiding over it. She stood at the crest of the primary dune, looking down at the chaotic unloading process like a general observing a particularly disappointing regiment. In a landscape defined by dirt, sweat, and erosion, she was a terrifying anomaly of preservation. She wore a linen field suit of such blinding, impractical white that it should have been stained within seconds of exposure to the atmosphere. It wasn't. She stood with her boots planted wide, a clipboard held against her chest like a shield, barking orders into a radio with a cadence that cut through the wind. She didn't look hot. She didn't look tired. She looked like she had negotiated a personal treaty with the sun to leave her alone. I, on the other hand, was already disintegrating. I am the kind of archaeologist who relies on the tactile connection with history. I need to feel the weight of the soil, the texture of the grain, the temperature of the stone. I operate on hunches and the vibration of the ground beneath my boots. Anna Cooper operated on LiDAR scans, carbon degradation rates, and a sterile surgical approach to the past. To her, history was a crime scene to be processed. To me, it was a conversation to be heard. I knew this clash was coming. Everyone in the department had warned me. But seeing her up there, outlined against the blinding sky, I felt a sudden, heavy sense of inevitability. The first skirmish happened less than an hour later. I was at the sorting table, holding a fragment of pottery that the previous team had discarded as common cookware. It was rough, reddish clay, but my thumb had found a groove in the handle that felt deliberate, a wear pattern that suggested ritual use rather than daily stew. I was turning it over, closing my eyes to feel the balance of it, when a shadow fell across the table. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. "Ms. Vance," she said. She didn't ask, she stated. Her voice was lower than I expected, with a gravelly texture that scraped pleasantly against my nerves despite the coldness of her tone. "We do not feel the artifacts at this site. We analyze them." I opened my eyes. She was standing too close. That was the first thing I noticed. Her proximity was a weapon. She loomed over the table, smelling of that sharp sandalwood and expensive sunscreen. "I think this is ceremonial, Professor. The wear pattern on the thumb grip." "You think?" she interrupted, snatching the shard from my hand. Her fingers brushed mine, cool and dry against my sweaty palm. The contact was brief, barely a second, but it sent a bizarre, static shock up my arm. She held the shard up to the light, her eyes narrowing behind her polarized sunglasses. "Data, Ms. Vance, not poetry. You mislabeled this based on a hunch. In my trench, a hunch is just a lie you tell yourself, because you are too lazy to do the math." She dropped the shard back onto the table with a dismissive clatter. It spun on the wood, settling between us. "If I catch you prioritizing your intuition over my protocols again, you will be on the next supply truck back to civilization. Do we understand each other?" "Crystal clear," I managed, my voice tight. She held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't just a reprimand, it was an assessment. She was dissecting me, looking for the weak points in my structure. And God help me, in that moment of absolute humiliation, looking up at her sneer and her perfect, unyielding posture. I didn't feel hate. I felt a sudden, terrifying pull. I respected the brutality of her standards. I wanted to impress her almost as much as I wanted to argue with her. She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing in the dust with a racing heart and the distinct realization that the desert heat wasn't going to be the only thing making me sweat for the next month. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was grueling, punishing, and electric with unspoken tension. The romance of archaeology dies the moment you realize the job is mostly moving dirt from pile A to pile B, while the inside of your nose slowly turns into concrete. The days settled into a grueling, punishing rhythm. We were sifting through centuries of sand, looking for a civilization that had been very good at hiding, and the physical toll was immediate. My hands were permanently stained a rusty red, the dust working its way into the whorls of my fingerprints, impossible to scrub away. My muscles ached with a constant dull throb that felt like a second heartbeat. Cooper naturally remained immaculate. She moved through the site like she was hovering slightly above the filth, her linens crisp, her focus absolute. While the rest of us were sweating through our shirts and cursing the heat, she was a study in cool, detached efficiency. The friction point was Sector 4. The ground felt different there. It wasn't just the visual stratification, it was the resistance. When my trowel hit the earth, the vibration traveled up my arm, a dull thud rather than the soft shush of loose sand. I knew there was structure there. I could feel the ghost of a wall waiting to be exhaled from the ground. I wanted to dig deeper, to widen the trench and follow the line. Cooper stood on the edge of the pit, looking down at me like I was a child playing in a sandbox. She tapped her tablet with a stylus, the sound sharp in the dry air. The ground-penetrating radar is negative, Ms. Vance. It reads as solid bedrock for another 3 meters. We are not wasting resources chasing your imagination. Move to Sector 5. I looked up, squinting against the glare. The radar is bouncing off a density shift. It could be a retaining wall. Bedrock doesn't feel like this. The radar, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, does not have feelings. It has data. We are on a schedule. Move. This became our dance. I would push. She would block. I would theorize, offering a narrative of the people who lived here, and she would cite a hydrological survey from 1998 that disproved me. But here's the thing about our arguments. She liked them. When I challenged her, when I didn't just fold like the other grad students who were terrified of her reputation, something sparked in those dark, intelligent eyes. It wasn't annoyance. It was engagement. It was the only time she looked at me like I was a peer and not a liability. We were arguing about stratigraphy and masonry styles, but the subtext was entirely different. It was a flex of mental muscles, a way of testing each other's weight. I would catch her watching me when I made a particularly sharp point. Her lips pressed in a thin line that wasn't quite a frown. It was the look of someone deciding if you were a worthy opponent. It was intellectual foreplay, sharp and exhilarating, and it left me feeling more winded than the digging. I waited until she went to check the solar generator array. It was petty, reckless, and exactly the kind of insubordination that gets you blacklisted from every dig site from Cairo to Lima. I went back to Sector 4. I didn't use the heavy pick. I used my hands and a small brush, working with a frantic, quiet intensity. 10 minutes. That was all I needed. I cleared 6 inches of bedrock to reveal the smooth, unmistakable curve of a fired clay brick. Not natural stone, masonry. When she came back, I didn't say a word. I just stood there, layered in grit, pointing at the brick with my trowel. She stopped at the edge of the trench. She looked at the hole, then at the tablet in her hand, then at me. The stillness was heavy enough to crush a lung. She descended into the trench, her boots crunching on the loose soil, sliding down the incline with practiced grace. She knelt next to the brick, removing her glove to run a bare finger over the edge. "It is a foundation marker," she said quietly. "The radar missed it," I said, unable to keep the smugness out of my voice. The density was too close to the stone. She stood up, towering over me in the narrow space. She was close enough that I could smell the heat radiating off her linen shirt mixed with that signature sandalwood soap. She didn't yell. She took off her sunglasses, and her eyes were bright, intense, the pupils blown wide. "You disobeyed a direct order." "I found the wall." "You got lucky." But there was no heat in the rebuke. The corner of her mouth twitched. It was a microscopic movement, but I saw it. It was almost a smile. "Document it. Then get out of my hole." The nights were worse than the days. The main tent became a pressure cooker. We would gather for debriefings, the air thick with lantern smoke and the smell of strong coffee and kerosene. Cooper would sit at the head of the trestle table, the lamplight casting deep, flickering shadows across her face, turning her into something carved from marble. I would be presenting my field notes, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel her gaze on me. It was a physical weight, a tactile thing. She wasn't looking at my notes. She was watching my mouth move, watching the way my hands shaped the air when I got excited about a theory. The air between us would charge, static and heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying. The other students were oblivious, worried about their credits, but I felt like I was sitting across from a loaded weapon, waiting for the safety to click off. The intellectual rivalry was manageable. We were channeling the frustration into work, sublimating the attraction into data points and heated debates. But the desert doesn't care about professional boundaries. It just waits for you to make a mistake. And the physical dangers of the site were about to force us out of the theoretical and into something much more visceral. The trench in Sector 4 was a narrow throat of earth, barely 4 feet wide and dropping 6 feet down into the history of the basin. The air down there didn't circulate. It pooled, heavy and stagnant, pressing against my temples. I was tracing the line of the brickwork I'd fought so hard to uncover, my trowel scraping against the mortar with a meditative rhythm. The heat was making the horizon dance above the trench lip, a watery mirage that made it hard to focus on anything above eye level. Cooper was up on the surface, reviewing the shoring protocols. I could hear her boots pacing back and forth, a rhythmic crunch that usually set my teeth on edge, but had become a strange, grounding comfort in the isolation of the pit. Then the sound changed. It wasn't the crunch of a boot. It was a low, sickening groan from the earth itself, a deep, vibrating bass note that I felt in my teeth before I heard it. I stopped scraping. I looked up at the west wall of the trench. The dirt wasn't solid anymore. It was fluid. A hairline fracture appeared in the dried mud, branching out like lightning in a storm cloud. I saw it happen in slow motion, the structural failure of 3 tons of compacted sand, losing its battle with gravity. I should have moved. I should have scrambled for the ladder, but my brain stalled, fascinated by the terrified physics of the collapse. I didn't hear a shout. I heard an impact. Cooper didn't issue a command. She didn't radio for help. She simply dropped. 1 second she was a silhouette against the blinding sun, and the next she was a blur of white linen and kinetic force. She didn't reach for my hand. She tackled me. Her shoulder hit my midsection with the force of a linebacker, driving the air out of my lungs and slamming me sideways against the opposite wall, just as the west face sheared off. The world dissolved into noise and grit. The roar of falling earth was deafening, a physical pressure that hammered against my eardrums. Darkness swallowed us, thick and choking. I squeezed my eyes shut, curling instinctively, waiting for the crushing weight to break me. But it didn't come. Or rather, it didn't hit me. When the noise settled into the sliding hiss of settling debris, I realized I wasn't buried. I was shielded. Cooper was arched over me, her arms braced against the uncollapsed wall, her body forming a protective cage. Her face was buried in the crook of my neck, her breathing ragged and hot against my skin. We were tangled in a heap of limbs and displaced soil, the space around us reduced to a pocket of air, barely big enough for 2 people. "Don't move!" she rasped. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its polish, raw and shaking. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. Her weight was pressing me into the dirt, heavy and solid. My hands were gripping her arms, my fingers digging into the linen sleeves. I could feel the tremors running through her muscles, the adrenaline vibrating under her skin. She lifted her head slowly, shaking the dust from her hair. Her sunglasses were gone, lost in the slide. For the first time, I saw her eyes without the filter of lenses or professional distance. They were wide, the pupils blown so large they swallowed the iris. There was no calculation in them, no assessment of the project timeline. There was only fear, stark, naked fear. Not for the site, but for me. "Are you—" She stopped, swallowed hard, and tried again. "Is anything broken?" "I don't think so," I whispered. My voice sounded small in the confined space. She didn't take my word for it. She shifted, her knees bracketing my hips to keep her weight off my legs, and began to check. Her hands, usually so careful with artifacts, were frantic on me. She ran her palms down my arms, checked my ribs, pressed firmly against my collarbones. It was a medical assessment, a standard field protocol for trauma, but it didn't feel medical. Her hands were searingly hot through my sweat-dampened shirt. Every place she touched left a burn, a phantom imprint of pressure. When her fingers skimmed my ribs to check for fractures, I gasped, not from pain, but from the electric shock of the contact. She froze, her hand splayed over my heart, which was hammering against my chest wall like it was trying to break out. She looked down at her hand, then up at my face. The distance between us was non-existent. I could see the individual grains of red dust caught in her eyelashes. I could smell the terror on her, sharp and metallic, cutting through the sandalwood. "You have a pulse of 140, she murmured, her thumb brushing the spot right over my heart. "You jumped into a collapsing trench," I countered, my breath hitching. "You were too slow." "You saved me." The air in the pocket shifted. The adrenaline of survival began to curdle into something else. The fear was receding, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve of attraction. She was straddling me in the dirt, her hair wild, her pristine suit ruined, and she had never looked more real. She realized the position at the same moment I did. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, lingered there for a heartbeat that felt like an hour, and then snapped away. She pulled back, the professional mask slamming back into place with audible force. "We need to clear the debris," she said, her voice stiff. "The stability is compromised." She climbed off me, offering a hand to pull me up. But the grip lingered. When I was on my feet, she didn't let go immediately. She squeezed my fingers, hard. A silent, desperate confirmation that I was solid, that I was there, before dropping my hand and turning to shout orders at the crew running toward us. The dust was settling, but the air between us remained charged, vibrating with the ghost of her weight on top of me. We had survived the earth trying to swallow us, but the sky was already turning a bruised, angry purple in the east. The real storm hadn't even started yet. The sky didn't just darken, it bruised. That's the only way to describe the sudden, violent shift in the atmosphere. The bruised purple horizon we had ignored in the aftermath of the collapse suddenly rushed forward, consuming the blue sky with terrifying speed. A haboob isn't just a storm. It is a solid wall of earth, a mile high and moving at 60 miles an hour, designed to erase everything in its path. 1 minute, the camp was a bustle of organized recovery. The next, the air pressure dropped so sharply my ears popped and the wind began to scream. It wasn't a howl, it was a mechanical, grinding shriek of sand blasting against stone. "Secure the perimeter!" Cooper's voice cut through the rising gale, but it sounded thin, swallowed instantly by the roaring wind. Chaos erupted. The orderly excavation site dissolved into a frantic scramble of people trying to tie down tarps and cover the trenches. I was running toward the main mess tent, clutching a bundle of surveying rods, when the wall of dust hit us. It was like being tackled by the atmosphere. The visibility dropped to 0 instantly. The world turned into a swirling, choking vortex of red grit. I couldn't see the mess tent. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I spun around, disoriented, the wind whipping my hair into my eyes, stinging my skin like 1,000 tiny needles. I saw a flicker of light to my left, the heavy-duty strobe of the equipment tent. I lunged for it, fighting the wind that was trying to knock me flat, and threw myself through the flap just as a gust nearly tore the canvas from its moorings. I wasn't alone. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but still breathable. Cooper was there, frantically shoving boxes of field notes into waterproof cases. She looked up as I stumbled in, her hair wild, her face flushed. We didn't have time to speak. The wind slammed into the side of the tent with the force of a battering ram. The aluminum frame groaned, the metal shrieking under the strain. "The zipper!" she yelled, pointing at the entrance. I turned and hauled the heavy industrial zipper down, sealing us in. The sudden drop in noise was jarring. It went from a deafening roar to a muffled, rhythmic drumming, like we were inside a drum being beaten by a giant. But the seal did something else. It killed the light. The battery-operated lanterns, hanging from the center pole, flickered once, twice, and then, with a pathetic buzz, died. We were plunged into a darkness so total it felt heavy. It pressed against my eyelids, disorienting and absolute. For a moment, there was only the sound of our breathing and the violent snapping of the canvas walls. "Professor," I called out, my voice shaking. "I'm here," she answered. Her voice came from the floor, lower than I expected. "Get down, ideally under the table. If the poles snap, you do not want to be standing." I fumbled my way forward, my hands outstretched, swimming through the ink-black air. I bumped into the edge of a steel crate, then the leg of the drafting table. I crawled underneath, the space tight and enclosed. My hand brushed against something warm and soft. Fabric. Then a knee. "Sorry," I breathed, pulling back. "Stay," she commanded. But the imperious edge was gone. It was practical. "We need to anchor the center. The wind is shifting." I moved closer, settling onto the ground beside her. We were sitting knee to knee in the dark, the only two solid things in a world that felt like it was tearing itself apart. The dynamic had shifted as abruptly as the weather. Outside, she was the lead professor, the woman who commanded respect and feared no one. In here, stripped of her team, her tools, and her vision, she was just a person in the dark, clutching a box of archives to her chest like it was a lifeline. The tent wall behind her buckled inward, slapping against her back. She gasped a sharp intake of air and instinctively leaned forward. I reached out, finding her arm in the darkness, gripping her bicep to steady her. She didn't pull away. In the sensory deprivation of the storm, the physical connection became the only truth. I could feel the tension vibrating in her muscles, the rapid beat of her pulse under my fingertips. The smell of the storm, ozone and dry, electric dust, mixed with her scent, that familiar sandalwood, now spiked with the metallic tang of adrenaline. We sat there, suspended in the dark, while the desert tried to bury us. And for the first time, the silence between us wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. The darkness acts as a strange kind of truth serum. Without the visual cues of rank, the stiff collar of her shirt, the way she usually holds her chin high, the judgmental arch of her eyebrow, the hierarchy between us begins to dissolve. We are just two voices in a vibrating box of canvas, huddled under a drafting table while the world tries to sandblast us out of existence. The noise outside is relentless, a screaming constant that forces us to lean in closer just to be heard. I can feel the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine, a steady, radiating heat that feels jarringly human coming from a woman I've only ever thought of as a machine. "You didn't have to tackle me," I say. The words come out before I can check them against my internal censor. "In the trench, you could have just shouted." The reaction time for a verbal command is 0.4 seconds. She replies instantly, her voice cutting through the dark with that familiar academic reflex. The collapse velocity was too high. Physics dictated a physical intervention. "It wasn't physics," I counter, turning my head toward where I know her face is. "It was instinct. You were scared." "I am never scared, Ms. Vance. I am prepared." "You're lying." The quiet that follows weighs more than the storm. I have never called her a liar. I have never dared to challenge her reality, only her data. My heart hammers against my ribs, waiting for the explosion, for the dressing down that will surely follow. But it doesn't come. Instead, I hear a sound that shocks me more than the wind. A long, ragged exhale. It is the sound of a structure, finally settling under too much weight. "Why is it so terrifying for you?" I ask, my voice softer now, stripping away the accusation and leaving only genuine curiosity. "To be wrong, to be human. You run this site like a military operation. You treat every hunch I have like it's a personal insult. Why?" She shifts beside me, her linen trousers rustling against the dirt floor. "Do you know how many female lead excavators are currently running Tier 1 sites in this hemisphere?" she asks. Her voice is low, lacking its usual projection. It sounds intimate, almost fragile. 3. "And do you know how many of them have secured funding for the next season?" I don't know." "1, she says. "Me. And that funding hangs by a thread so thin you could snap it with a breath." "But you're a legend," I protest. "Your work on the basin." "My work is scrutinized with a microscope that my male colleagues never face," she snaps. But the anger isn't directed at me anymore. It's directed at the world outside the tent. If a man follows a hunch and finds nothing, he is thorough. If I do it, I am scattered. If a man yells at his crew, he is passionate. If I do it, I am hysterical. I do not have the luxury of intuition, Elena. I do not have the luxury of mistakes. One slip, one uncatalogued artifact, one collapsed trench, and the board pulls the plug. My legacy isn't written in stone, it is written in sand, and I am tired of holding back the tide. The confession hangs in the air, raw and bleeding. It recontextualizes everything, her rigidity, her cruelty, her obsession with protocol. It wasn't arrogance, it was armor. She wasn't trying to crush me, she was trying to survive. "You aren't alone in the trench, Anna," I say. The use of her first name feels illicit, a crossed boundary that tastes like iron. "You don't have to carry the whole mountain by yourself. That's why you have a team. That's why you have me." "You are chaos," she whispers, but the bite is gone. "I'm balance," I correct her. "You build the structure. I find the life inside it. You don't have to guard the gate if you let someone else help you hold the walls up." Outside, the screaming wind begins to drop. The violent snapping of the tent walls settles into a rhythmic shudder. The storm is passing the peak, leaving behind a sudden, ringing quiet that amplifies the sound of our breathing. In the dark, the professional distance that usually separates us feels miles away. I can hear the catch in her breath, the slight tremor that betrays her exhaustion. I move my hand in the darkness. It is a blind, instinctive search. My fingers brush the rough canvas of the floor, then the cool metal of the table leg, and then finally the warmth of her hand resting on her knee. I don't pull back. I cover her hand with mine. Her skin is cool, her fingers slender and strong. I feel her flinch, a tiny, microscopic recoil, but she doesn't pull away. She freezes, trapped between the instinct to retreat and the desperate human need for contact. I run my thumb over her knuckles, a slow, deliberate stroke. It isn't the touch of a student seeking approval. It is the touch of an equal offering an anchor. "It's okay to be tired," I whisper into the dark. She turns her hand beneath mine. Her palm presses against my palm, her fingers sliding between mine to grip tight. It is a desperate, crushing grip, the way a drowning person grabs a rope. And in that darkness, with our fingers interlaced and the smell of dust and sandalwood wrapping around us, the last brick of her fortress finally falls. She doesn't pull her hand away. That is the first shock, the one that stops the breath in my throat. The second shock, the one that sends a tremor through my entire nervous system, is the way she moves. Instead of the polite, stabilizing grip of a colleague maximizing surface area for comfort, her fingers shift. They slide between mine, interlocking with a deliberate, terrifying slowness. It isn't a handhold, it is a claim. She tightens her grip, her nails digging slightly into the back of my hand, a desperate, grounding anchor in the shifting world. The emergency backup light on the generator bank finally decides to kick in, buzzing with a low, electric hum. It casts a weak, amber wash over the tent, turning the dust hanging in the air into a suspended galaxy of gold. The light changes everything. It throws the sharp angles of her face into relief, highlighting the smudge of red clay on her cheekbone and the way her hair has escaped its pins to curl damply against her neck. The lead professor is gone. In her place is a woman who has just survived a disaster and is realizing that the danger hasn't passed. It has just changed shape. She is looking at me. Her gaze is heavy, unblinking, and focused entirely on my mouth. I can feel the weight of it, a physical pressure that is more volatile than the storm outside. The air between us thickens, charged with a static that makes the hair on my arms stand up. It is the same tension that fills the command tent during a crisis, but twisted into something darker, something sultry and forbidden. "You are dangerous, Elena," she murmurs. Her voice is low, a rough velvet sound that vibrates in the small space between us. "I'm just a student," I whisper, though the title feels like a lie the moment it leaves my lips. "No," she says, and she leans in. The movement is fluid, erasing the last few inches of propriety. "You are the only thing here I can't predict." She closes the gap. The first press of her lips is tentative, a question asked in the dark. It tastes of salt and red dust and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone, but the hesitation lasts less than a heartbeat. When I make a small, wrecked sound in the back of my throat, she surges forward. The kiss deepens, becoming demanding, a sudden, violent release of 3 weeks of pent-up frustration and intellectual sparring. It isn't gentle. It is a collision. It is the breaking of a dam. Her free hand comes up to cut my jaw, her thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with a possessiveness that makes my knees weak. She kisses me like she argues, with total focus, dismantling my defenses until I have no choice but to yield. I reach for her, my hands tangling in the linen of her shirt, pulling her closer until there is no air left between us. The fabric is rough against my palms, warm from her body heat, and the contrast between the crisp, professional material and the soft, yielding skin beneath it is dizzying. She takes control. Of course she does. Even in this, she has to lead. She guides me, her body pressing me back against the leg of the drafting table before she realizes it's too hard, too unforgiving. She breaks the kiss, gasping for air, her pupils blown so wide her eyes look black. She grabs the front of my shirt, bunching the denim in her fist. "The cot," she breathes, a command and a plea all at once. We move blindly, stumbling over the equipment crates in the amber gloom. The storm outside is still raging, the wind hammering against the canvas, but it feels distant now, irrelevant. The only reality is the heat of her hands and the sound of our breathing. We collapse onto the narrow field cot in the corner, the canvas groaning under our combined weight. It is a tangle of limbs and friction, the heavy drag of denim against linen, the searing contact of skin where buttons have come undone. She straddles my waist, her weight heavy and grounding. She looks down at me, her hair falling around her face like a curtain, shutting out the rest of the tent. There is no hesitation in her now, only a raw, unflinching hunger. She kisses my throat, her mouth hot and wet, moving over my pulse point with a reverence that terrifies me. I arch into her, my hands finding the small of her back, mapping the tension in her muscles. This is reckless. This is career suicide. If anyone walks in, if the storm clears and the foreman checks the tent, we are destroyed. But as her hands slide under my shirt, tracing the line of my ribs, I realize I don't care. The fear of being caught is nothing compared to the terrifying relief of finally being touched by her. The cerebral tension that has defined our relationship ignites into a physical blaze, burning through the protocols and the hierarchy until there is nothing left but the two of us, tangled together in the dust and the dark, trying to consume each other before the sun comes up. The night blurs into a haze of sensation, the storm outside fading into a lullaby until exhaustion finally drags us under, leaving us entangled in the wreckage of our own making. The transition from lover back to subordinate takes exactly 45 seconds. That is how long it takes Anna Cooper to stand up, smooth the violent wrinkles from her linen shirt with the heel of her hand, and locate her sunglasses in the dust. I am still sitting on the edge of the cot, my boots unlaced, my mind reeling in the sudden, blinding vacuum of her withdrawal. The intimacy of the night before, the heat, the sweat, the desperate, clawing need, evaporates the moment she snaps those sunglasses onto her face. It is like watching a steel shutter slam down over a shop window. "The storm has cleared," she says. Her voice is back to its factory setting, cool, clipped, and utterly devoid of inflection. She doesn't look at me. She is looking at the tent flap, assessing the light bleeding through the canvas. "We have lost 12 hours of excavation time. I want a full damage assessment of the trenches by 0900. Check the shoring in Sector 4 first." "Anna," I start, the name feeling heavy and clumsy on my tongue in the daylight. She turns on me so fast I flinch. "Professor Cooper," she corrects, and the words land like a slap. What happened in here was a reaction to extreme stress and atmospheric pressure. It was a lapse in judgment, an anomaly. It does not exist outside of this tent, and it will not impact the efficiency of this dig. Do you understand? I stare at her, the sting of rejection hot behind my eyes. I feel foolish. I feel used. I feel like a cheap paperback novel she read to pass the time during a delay and is now tossing in the trash. "A lapse in judgment?" I repeat, my voice flat. "Is that what we're calling it? Because it felt a lot like—" "It is an outlier data point, Ms. Vance," she interrupts, her voice rising just enough to silence me. "And we discard outliers? Get dressed. You look like a mess." She unzips the tent flap and steps out into the blinding white morning without looking back. I am left alone in the sudden silence, the smell of sandalwood and sex still heavy in the air, feeling like I've just been excavated and found wanting. When I finally emerge, the camp is already a hive of activity. The sun is punishingly bright, bleaching the color out of the world. I keep my head down, pulling my hat low, terrified that the guilt is tattooed on my forehead. Every glance from a grad student feels like an accusation. Every whisper feels like a rumor taking flight. But no one is looking at me. They are looking at Cooper. She is standing by the main generator, barking orders at the foreman. She looks impeccable. Somehow she has managed to pin her hair back into that severe, terrifying bun. Her posture is rigid, her gestures sharp. But as I walk past, clutching my clipboard like a shield, I see it. Her left hand is resting on the generator casing, and her index finger is tapping a frantic, erratic rhythm against the metal. It is a tremor, a microscopic betrayal of the calm she is projecting. She isn't cold because she doesn't care. She is cold because she is vibrating apart. The tension on the site is brittle, a glass wire waiting to snap. We work in silence. I go to Sector 4, checking the shoring, my hands shaking as I measure the wall stability. Cooper circles the perimeter, hovering, criticizing, micromanaging every shovel stroke. The air between us is toxic. It isn't just awkward, it is hostile. She is pushing me, riding me harder than ever before, trying to prove to herself, and to me, that the lines are still drawn in ink. Then the real storm hits. It starts as a plume of dust on the northern horizon, darker and faster than the wind. It isn't weather, it is a convoy. 3 black, pristine SUVs tear across the basin, their chrome grills flashing in the sun like bared teeth. The site goes quiet. Even the generator seems to hesitate. Cooper goes still. I watch the color drain from her face, leaving her pale beneath the desert tan. "The board," she whispers. It isn't an announcement. It is a curse. The vehicles skid to a halt near the command tent. Doors open and men in suits step out into the heat, looking uncomfortable and expensive. They aren't here for a tour. They are here for an execution. The funding review wasn't scheduled for another month. They have come to ambush her. Cooper straightens her spine, the motion mechanical and painful to watch. She adjusts her cuffs, takes a breath that doesn't quite fill her lungs, and walks toward them. She looks isolated. She looks like she is bracing for an impact she knows she can't survive. And in that moment, the anger in my chest dissolves, replaced by a sudden, fierce clarity. She didn't reject me because she regretted the touch. She pushed me away because she knew the wolves were coming and she didn't want me standing in the kill zone. The interrogation takes place in the open air, under the merciless glare of the noon sun. The board members are sweating in their expensive suits, looking at the excavation site like it is a money pit rather than a historical treasure. The chairman, a man with a face like dried leather and eyes that count pennies, is relentless. He points a manicured finger at the lack of significant finds in Sector 4, demanding explanations for the delays. Cooper is standing her ground, but she is brittle. I can see the exhaustion trembling in her hands, the way she shifts her weight to hide the tremor in her leg. When she tries to explain the radar anomaly, her voice wavers. It is a tiny crack, barely a hairline fracture, but the chairman hears it. He opens his mouth to cut her funding, to end her career right there in the dust. I just move. The radar anomaly was a calibration issue, I say, my voice cutting through the heat, louder and steadier than I feel. The board turns to me. Cooper freezes, her eyes wide and terrified. I step up beside her, shoulder to shoulder, presenting a united front. Professor Cooper's predictive model suggested the masonry was too dense for the standard scan. She authorized a manual confirmation to prove it. I don't wait for permission. I walk to the edge of the trench. If you will look here. I jump down into the pit, my boots skidding on the loose gravel. I grab the heavy pickaxe leaning against the shoring. I swing it with everything I have. The steel tip strikes the earth with a violent, reverberating thud, scraping against something hard. A spark flies, smelling of flint and iron. I brush away the loose dirt with my bare hand, revealing the deep, unmistakable red of a fired brick wall. The palace foundation, I announce, looking up at them, breathless and streaked with red clay. Exactly where she said it would be. The silence is absolute. Then the chairman smiles, a slow, predatory expression of satisfaction. Impressive, Anna. Very impressive. Your instincts remain sharp. Cooper looks down at me in the trench. Her expression is unreadable, a chaotic war zone of shock, relief, and dawning realization. I can see the strain in the tight line of her jaw, the way she shifts her weight to hide the fatigue in her leg. We survive the inspection. The board leaves an hour later, promising double the funding for the next season. The camp breathes a collective sigh of relief, but I just walk away, heading for the ridge to watch the sunset. She finds me there 10 minutes later. The sky is bleeding purple and gold, the desert cooling rapidly as the shadows stretch out. She stands next to me, close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from her linen shirt, but she doesn't touch me. The air between us is heavy with things unsaid. You lied to the board, she says softly, her voice carrying on the wind. I improvised, I correct, kicking a stone off the ledge. You knew the wall was there, Anna. You just needed someone to break the ground. She is silent for a long moment. I was freezing up, she admits, the confession barely audible. I was terrified of being wrong. You were reckless. I was right. She turns to face me. Her hair is loose again, the wind whipping it across her face. Yes, you were. She takes a step closer, invading my space with that familiar, intoxicating arrogance. I cannot have a student who undermines me, Elena. Good thing I'm not just a student anymore, I challenge, holding her gaze. I'm the one who watches your back when the walls start to crumble. She studies my face, her eyes dark and intense. The power dynamic is shifting, realigning into something new, something dangerous. A partner, she tests the word, tasting it like a rare vintage. A partner, I agree. But I'm still messy, and I still rely on hunches. I suppose, she murmurs, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, that I can provide the structure if you provide the friction. We stand there as the sun dips below the horizon, plunging the desert into twilight. We aren't touching, but the space between us is electric, charged with the promise of the night to come. The secret isn't a burden anymore. It's a weapon we hold together. The dig site isn't just dirt and history anymore. It is the landscape of our shared secret. We uncovered the past, but the most valuable discovery wasn't in the ground. It was in the tent during the storm, where the rules finally broke. The dust has settled, but the heat between us is just rising. If you want to explore more stories, where professional lines blur into something much hotter, subscribe now.